Welcome back to another story on Whispered Tales.
All his wife ever wanted was 10 minutes with him. But by the time Ethan was ready to listen, she was standing behind a glass wall, praying he'd wake up. Night in the ICU felt thick, like a fine mist that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Ethan Cole opened his eyes to the steady beep, 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 each tone like a drop of time tapping on the glass of an invisible clock. The fluorescent lights above him blurred into pale halos, stretching into streaks when his gaze slid across the white ceiling. He tried to breathe in. His throat was raw and sandy, as if dust had settled there. Air slid into his lungs with the cold, metallic bite of oxygen. A rubber cuff hugged his left arm, tightening gently, releasing, like a cautious hand both checking and soothing. Out of the corner of his eye, clear plastic tubes caught the light and glinted, thin rivers carrying life across the pale banks of still bodies. He didn't know how long he'd been there. In the ICU, time didn't flow, it pooled, silent, like dew on a window pane. In the bed opposite, an older man with silver hair lay motionless, half his face hidden beneath a breathing mask, his thin hands placed neatly, as if stealing a long afternoon nap. To the left, a young woman with a short crop of hair, one stray lock slipping from her headband and clinging to her temple, was so pale the veins at her temples looked like faded ink. At the foot of each bed, a monitor glowed with tired-looking green lines rising and falling, like tidewater. Numbers blinked and danced, sometimes skittering all at once so that a nearby machine barked a hoarse alert, then fell quiet again, returning the ICU to its familiar beeping. Ethan shut his eyes, trying to gather a clear scrap of memory. A white wall, a busy ward. Someone's shoes clicked past. He reached back for whatever came before the ICU. Before this light, before the smell of sanitizer. He was swimming upriver, catching flashes that popped in his mind like brief sparks. A glossy brown conference table under office lights. A phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. A tense meeting full of mask-like faces. A big window reflecting the washed-out gray of late afternoon. Then a dark gap, darkness spreading like ink in a glass of water. He shifted, some taped line tugged at his skin, a reminder that his body was now a construction site posted with little signs that read slow, caution. The pain didn't crack like lightning. It soaked in like a steady drizzle on a tin roof, just enough to tell him he still belonged on this side of the line. Footsteps drew near, soft soles, sure and even. A warm, quiet voice, as if afraid to shatter the air. "Mr. Cole, can you hear me?" A face leaned in, half hidden behind a pale blue mask. In the man's eyes was the seasoned steadiness of someone used to walking the narrow ground between life and death. "Just breathe. Good. I'm Dr. Patel." He glanced over the monitors, tapped a few buttons, and the green lines obediently shifted their rhythm. "Waking up is a good sign. We'll keep a close watch. Try not to talk too much. Water." He tilted a paper cup. A few cool drops touched Ethan's tongue like the first rain of the season. Ethan managed the smallest nod. The doctor stepped away, leaving a light soap scent and the feeling that Ethan had come back from some cliff edge, footing not yet firm on solid land. Beyond the ICU's glass wall, the hallway lay long and mostly empty, only the shadows of plastic chairs strung together like a silent sentence. Out there, hazy behind the glass, Ethan caught a familiar shape. A small woman with her hair pulled back, coat folded in her arms, back slightly bent as if trying to tuck all her worry into one neat posture. The image was indistinct, like a shadow pressed into fog, but his heart knew before his eyes did. Grace. The name escaped, soft, like air slipping out of a dry throat. Grace. Her presence changed the room's soundtrack. The beeping no longer felt cold. It sounded like the tick of a kitchen clock in a home where the hands moved through late dinners, quick goodbye kisses, and all the times he'd said, "I'm busy," and she'd quietly nodded. The nights he came home late with the perfume of work clinging to his coat while the kitchen smells, the line-dried cotton, the warm scent of her skin faded from a cramped little apartment that somehow grew wide with distance. He remembered her hand settling on his shoulder, light as thread. "Do you remember this weekend?" "I have clients," he answered. Her eyes dimmed, like a lamp cupped by a palm. He wanted to lift a hand, to call to her, but his body felt bulky, as if it too was afraid to jostle this fragile room. He searched for her through the reflections, glass like a still pond, mixing the white coats, passing figures, and her familiar outline. At moments he thought she wasn't there at all, that his memory had sweet-talked him with a mirage, like a desert traveler's oasis. Then he caught one unmistakable detail, the ash-gray scarf he'd given her in a winter they thought wouldn't turn cold. She still kept it, even though the city rarely warranted it. She looped it around her neck, and in that small gesture, he could feel time turn a page. The software of an automatic blood draw tugged him back. A young nurse with bright eyes came to the foot of his bed and checked his name. Ethan Cole. The way she said it was gentle, as if she could hang his name on a stronger rope. How are you feeling? Any pain, dizziness, trouble breathing? He nodded slightly. Words were still circling back like birds fighting a headwind. She adjusted his pillow, pulled the blanket straight, and murmured something almost too soft to be heard. Meant for everyone lying still in this room. You're doing great. Keep going. Then she moved to the next bed, changing a drip with careful hands, talking to another nurse in a language of numbers and symbols that somehow carried tenderness we reserve for breakable things. At the next bed, a monitor's song turned urgent, the tone slicing the air. 3 staff appeared as if lifted from the floor itself, focused, quick, but never frantic. They worked around the silver-haired man, hands interlaced, short sentences, numbers. Ethan watched the lines spike and sag and rise again, like a brewing storm on a green screen. In that moment, he understood something simple and piercing. Every beep in here was a chance. Every wave on the screen said, still here. Every bag, needle, and tube was a narrow bridge thrown across a ravine. He looked back to the glass. The chair was empty. His chest tightened. Then he heard the faintest slide of a door. A nurse motioned, and Grace stepped closer to the outside edge, right where the rules said family could stand. Her eyes found his. There was no movie-style rush, no sobbing crescendo. Only the meaningful quiet of 2 people who had lived through too many "we'll talk tomorrow" days and too many later tonight nights. He wanted to say, I'm sorry, 2 words light as dust, but the letters stalled in his throat and became a slow breath. Grace lifted her hand, rested it over her heart, then pointed to him. I'm here, for you. The tiny gesture made warmth rise behind his eyes. The tears slid inward, warm and steady. A heavy weariness settled on him, as if someone had laid another blanket across his chest. Ethan let his eyelids drift and listened to the room breathe. The ventilator's rhythm became the metronome counting out the seconds he still had. In that deeper, drowsy place, memories returned in sharper focus. The morning he promised to eat breakfast with Grace and left before the kettle sang. Her midday call asking what he wanted for dinner. The text he let sit. The meal reheated and reheated. The dining table turning into storage for conversations never started. He saw her reading by the window, lamplight cupping her narrow shoulders, while he sat at his desk, back turned, head bowed over numbers. Distance made no noise. It just grew, walls inching apart, the hallway through their home stretching long. Somewhere inside that fatigue, someone whispered his name, not doctor, not nurse. A voice from the far side of waking, beyond the reach of sleep. Ethan, he opened his eyes. The ICU was the same, lights, glass, the pale green lines. But something had shifted. The monitor's beep slowed and rounded, solid as a drum with new skin. Maybe his setting had changed. Maybe his body had decided something. For a breath-long instant, he felt an unseen thread run from his chest through the glass to where Grace stood. It wasn't a fluid line or a cable. It was far too fine for that, thin enough to snap with a blink, strong enough to pull him back from the lip. He looked at his hand. On his ring finger, a shallow dent. The ghost of a band he'd taken off one night for no better reason than foolish pride. That dent sat there like faint ink, a message that had been waiting for its moment. He touched it with the tip of his finger, the way you'd feel a sorry you hadn't yet said out loud. He looked up and found Grace's eyes. His breath caught and split. He saw it plainly. Life is fragile and precious wasn't just a poster down the hospital hallway. It was a small bird trembling in his palm, ready to come if he could just warm it with his hand. At the far end of the room, the door opened and a draft from the hallway flowed in. A tall, lean figure came in quickly, his shoes no longer soft. Dr. Patel again, with 2 nurses and a compact ultrasound machine. He stepped to Ethan's bedside, his gaze bright and steady like a diver preparing for deep water. "Ethan, we're going to run another check. Look at me. Breathe steady." He set the probe on Ethan's chest. The screen bloomed with moving gray flecks, like rain sliding down glass. The beeps shifted once more, sketching a new pattern of life. And just then, through the glass, the receptionist's voice carried down the corridor, mixed with footsteps. "Family of patient Cole, please get ready." The sentence cut midair, as if a cord had been snipped. Ethan met the doctor's eyes, then looked back through the glass. Grace pressed her palm to it, open, like a small window. On his monitor, one firm line climbed. The sounds in the ICU kept their rhythm, but everything seemed to hold for the next beat. The beat that would decide how the coming pages of his life were going to be written. The word prepare still hung in the air, suspended somewhere near the ceiling like a loose thread that hadn't yet found its knot, when the world before Ethan began to change its texture. It didn't go dark, didn't vanish. It simply slowed, like a sheet of glass being filled with water until every edge softened, every line drifted. The beeping didn't stop. It just receded, turned into the faint rhythm of rain falling evenly over a lake. His breathing grew longer, warmer, and between each inhale and exhale, another sound appeared, so quiet it might have been imagined. The whisper of wool against wool. The ash-gray scarf. Grace. He meant to call her name, but before the word "gr" could find shape in his throat, the lake opened up into a corridor glimmering with watery light. No walls, no ceiling, just 2 rows of small lamps, glowing like fireflies, guiding the way. Each flicker a quiet burst of beep before it went out. Beneath his feet wasn't a floor, but a thin layer of water, cool enough to remind him he still belonged somewhere that had weight. The antiseptic smell had faded, replaced by the warm, musty scent of old books, the scent he used to find on Grace's hands at night when she closed her book, slipped in a bookmark, and looked up, waiting for him to say something he never did. At the far end of the corridor sat a man on a solitary bench. It was the silver-haired man from the bed across his own. He no longer wore the oxygen mask. Time had been ironed smooth across his face, leaving behind calm folds of rest. He looked at Ethan, not smiling, not cold. His hands lay neatly on his knees, like someone who'd spent a lifetime waiting for trains that never gave their schedule. "We've met before," the man said. His voice didn't echo. It arrived directly inside Ethan's head. "It's just that, earlier, you didn't have time to notice." "Where is this?" Ethan asked, and only then realized the words he spoke landed softly, like stepping onto water. "Between," the man said, tilting his head slightly. "A corridor between 2 shores. But don't fear the word between. Here, people often understand what they once missed." "You are?" Ethan hesitated. "Someone who once got lost among the beeps," the man shrugged, "and learned to listen differently." He gestured toward the distance. "You can keep walking. There are doors ahead. Each one leads to a place you thought you'd already left behind. Or you can return, if you've learned what you came to learn. No one forces you. But usually, before they return, people need to pick up something they dropped." Ethan looked down the corridor. There they were, doors standing like upright photographs. No hinges, no handles. Each one carried a small, familiar detail. One shimmered faintly with the metallic hue of a ring. Another bore a white porcelain teapot, its curved spout smiling softly. A third hung with a meeting room badge printed with his name in bold, impersonal letters. He began to walk. Ripples spread under his feet, circling out, fading, then returning, patient as time itself. The door with the teapot opened without a sound. Ethan stood in their small kitchen on the morning of their anniversary. Early lights spilled through the window and lay quietly on the table where 2 white bowls faced each other. The toast was neatly stacked, still warm enough to hold its scent. Grace stood by the counter, her back turned, her shoulders trembling, not from tears, but from holding a silence stretched too thin. Ethan saw himself walk in, glance at his watch, lean forward to brush her lips. Barely, like placing a period at the end of a rushed sentence. "I have to go," he heard himself say, his voice hoarse with coffee, with lack of sleep, with hurry. Grace half-turned, her smile fragile as fine china, beautiful, thin, easy to chip. "I know," she said. "I just wanted." But she never finished. The Ethan of that morning didn't ask what she wanted. He'd already grabbed his coat, opened the door, and left behind 2 empty bowls and a pot of tea that had never been poured. The image didn't break. It simply ended, perfectly measured. Ethan stood still in the kitchen. A draft came through the window, carrying again the faint scent of old paper. He walked to the table and laid his hand on the teapot. It was still warm, the warmth of memory, strangely durable. He lifted it to pour. No liquid came. He peered inside. It was filled with tiny black fragments, like the wings of beetles. Tilting the pot, he watched the fragments spill out, glimmering like drops of rain. They arranged themselves into words, the words into a sentence. "I just wanted 10 minutes with you." Ethan inhaled deeply, letting the scent of the letters settle into his chest. When he looked up, the kitchen had blurred again, its walls dissolving back into thin water. He returned to the corridor, where the silver-haired man still waited. The man didn't ask what he'd seen. He already knew. "The next door," he suggested. Ethan nodded and moved toward the one that shimmered with metallic light. It opened onto a rainy evening. His hand was turning a wedding ring under the desk lamp's glow. On the computer screen, an email draft waited, subject line, "Apologies for my absence." Beside it lay a small handwritten card from Grace. "Dinner date tonight, 7 p.m., our old place." Her script was round, the ink smudged slightly, as if brushed by rain. The Ethan of that night had sat there for a long time, typing, deleting, typing again, then leaving the message blank. Finally, he'd stood up suddenly, as though remembering a stove left burning. He'd turned off the office light, leaving the note alone on the desk, an island of white in a sea of dark. The next day, the ring was gone from his finger. It lay in a drawer, pinned beneath a stack of documents. Not out of betrayal, but pride, over a petty argument he'd mistaken for principle. And that principle had quietly locked him outside a door already open. Ethan looked at the faint indentation on his finger, the same one he'd touched in the ICU. In that room of memory, he opened the drawer and lifted the papers. The ring waited, its dull gleam patient rather than bright. He placed it in his palm. A coolness spread through him, carrying a new kind of stillness, the stillness of an apology landing exactly where it belonged. "I'm sorry," he said, not hoarse, not hurried this time. The words passed through the room without stirring dust, soaking into the darkness like rain into soil. When he opened his hand, the ring was gone, not lost, but returned to its place, a faint warmth, right above his heart. Back in the corridor, the silver-haired man had risen. He was no longer a patient here. He was the keeper of lights. "One more door," he said, pointing toward the meeting room tag with Ethan's name. "This one's harder. It's not about you and her. It's about you and yourself." The door opened. Air conditioning drifted out, scented with new carpet and fresh ink. A glass-walled conference room stretched before him. The city spread below like a circuit board. Ethan saw himself at the head of the table, speaking about a major project, risks, numbers, opportunities. Across from him, a younger colleague spoke passionately, eyes bright with belief in something that couldn't be measured by KPIs. When the others left, Ethan remained, staring at his reflection in the glass, his face overlaid with the city lights, a map on a map. He reached for his phone, opened a message window, typed, "Working late. Don't wait up." The keyboard recorded the words, but his heart didn't. He erased them. He opened his email app. A reminder popped up. Grace's follow-up appointment, Friday, 3:30 p.m. He stared at it as though it belonged to someone else's inbox, then tapped dismiss. He told himself, "After this project, I'll make it up to her." In that room, that sentence echoed like a promise outsourced to another man. Ethan looked at the version of himself from that night and finally recognized the real distance. Not born of work, but of fear. Fear that stepping outside the glow of performance charts would make him invisible. Fear of returning to a quiet home where no one applauded a neat report, only asked, "How do you feel today?" Fear of answering truthfully, and fear that the answer might not be worth hearing. He slowly touched the reminder about Grace's appointment. The memory blurred, shifting. Instead of dismiss, 2 simple buttons appeared, stay and go home. Ethan chose go home. The screen went dark. The lights in the room dimmed. Only his shadow remained, merging with the city's. When he turned, the corridor shimmered with wet light. The silver-haired man now stood beside him, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint scent of old wood from his coat. "You've started to hear it," the man said. "The small sounds." He tilted his head, listening toward the distant ICU. "They're calling your name over there. But here, there's one more place, no door this time. Just an opening to the water. You can go there and stand a while. Everyone gets to stand there once. Long enough to know what they want to return for." Ethan followed to where the corridor ended at a shoreline. The water before him wasn't deep, just a vast mirror reflecting a cloudless sky. No beeping now, only a breeze brushing his skin, gentle as a hand. He closed his eyes. The quiet sounds returned, Grace's sleeping breath, a spoon touching porcelain, the turn of a page, a key in the lock when he came home late, the soft hum she made when he'd say, "I'm busy tomorrow," not reproachful, not trapped, just fading thinner with the years. Those sounds threaded together, as fine as the yarn of her scarf. And now, that thread ran straight into his chest. "What do you want to come back for?" the silver-haired man asked behind him, not urging. Ethan opened his eyes. He didn't say for work. That phrase dissolved like salt in water. He didn't say for fear of dying. Fear wasn't a reason, just a shadow. He looked down at the water, where his reflection wasn't a weary man in an ICU bed, but a small point of light rippling outward. "For the breakfast I never poured," he said slowly. "For a 10-minute talk. For the gray scarf. For the letter I never wrote. For learning to answer honestly when someone asks, 'How are you today?' And for the day we'll walk slowly through the park, not needing to say much at all." The words left his lips, but they didn't fall. They rose, like newborn birds testing their wings. A faint breeze stirred. The entire corridor swayed, like a boat nudged half a degree by a small wave. From far away came the beeping again, urgent now, like someone knocking. Ethan turned to the man. The keeper of lights nodded, his dark eyes warm. "That's enough," he said. He lifted a hand, not to hold, just to point. "The way back is right behind you. But you already know, there's no door. Just step." Ethan inhaled. The air tasted of tea, books, and a faint trace of hospital soap. He stepped forward. The water beneath his feet warmed, like a sun-dried blanket. The firefly lights along the corridor dimmed, one by one, not leaving darkness, but giving way to a soft white light that poured in like milk. In that brightness, he heard the smallest sound, so small that anywhere else, he'd have missed it. Grace's whisper, one word only. Not don't, not go. Just his name, spoken as if greeting someone home after a long rain. "Ethan." He opened his eyes. The ICU came back, layer by layer. The white ceiling, the clear tubes, the green monitors, the faint hum of an ultrasound. Dr. Patel was still there, probe on his chest. A nurse was noting numbers, eyes flicking over the data with tender precision. The beeping had changed tone, lower, fuller, as though the machine had found the right key. Beyond the glass, Grace still stood, her palm pressed to the window where her heart beat. The hallway light framed the curve of her gray scarf. The world might never know of the water corridor he'd walked. It didn't need to. He knew, and that was enough. "Breathe with me," Dr. Patel said, calm and steady. "In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. He counted, a conductor guiding the rhythm of a piece already waiting inside them. Ethan followed. With each inhale, it felt like the words from the teapot flowed back through his lungs, washing the hidden corners. With each exhale, dust lifted gently off his ribs, settling somewhere below like the ashes of an old habit. By the third cycle, the beeps had synced with the count. By the fifth, they'd become one. "Good," the nurse murmured, almost to the silence itself. "Good." Ethan turned his gaze to the window. Grace wasn't crying. She just bit her lip lightly, like someone who's decided to wait for one more train, though the night's grown late. He wanted to raise his hand. The wires tugged him back, reminding him to move slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he chose another way. He shaped a word with his eyes, sent it through the glass. "Sorry." Grace nodded, and he knew there was no need for more words. The apology already had a place to stay, for now, in the teapot of another morning, waiting to be poured at the right time. Dr. Patel lifted the probe. "Good," he said, and for the first time since Ethan woke, he smiled. "Your body's saying it wants to stay. We'll keep things quiet now. Rest." He placed a warm hand on Ethan's shoulder, a touch so light it was like a period at the end of a finished sentence. When they stepped back, the ICU returned to its steady rhythm, the old clock ticking again after being wound. Ethan closed his eyes, not to flee the light, but to listen closer to the small sounds. In the soft dark, the corridor of water still existed, though it no longer asked him to walk. The silver-haired man was likely back on his bench, keeping the lights for someone else soon to pass through. And Ethan lay still, like a seed soaked just enough to swell with life. From deep inside his chest, an unspoken decision took shape. Tomorrow, if there is one, I'll ask Grace what she wanted. And I'll wait the full 10 minutes for her answer. I'll pour the tea. I'll learn to hear the beeps as the heartbeat of a home. And before sleep, I'll touch the mark on my finger and remember that the ring was never metal, but a warm circle around a promise. Somewhere nearby, a drop of water slid off a plastic tube and fell, soft as the turn of a page. And just like that, the night, though still the ICU, had changed by half. In the other half, the doors closed gently, waiting for morning, not to open with alarms, but with a sunrise steeped in the steam of a single cup of tea. The first morning after the night he returned, the ICU felt less dark, as if someone had cracked open the smallest seam to let a line of light slip in. It wasn't harsh. It was steady, settling along the edge of the sheets, glinting in a thin ribbon over clear plastic panels and the narrow veins of tubing. Ethan opened his eyes and felt his body like a map whose borders had just been redrawn. Numb territories receded, revealing tender stretches that were, unmistakably, alive. His nose still caught the antiseptic, mixed with plastic and a faint trace of someone's hand soap. The beeps no longer sounded like urgent knocking. They had become the room's own breathing, sure, composed, like an older neighbor counting raindrops on a porch. A nurse cracked the curtain just a bit, letting light fall along the bedside. She swapped a fluid bag, adjusted a line, speaking in short, gentle phrases. Ethan answered with his eyes. Inside his chest, his breath worked like a careful tradesman, patiently widening each corner of his lungs. Far out at the edge of his awareness, he could still hear a soft murmur like running water, the echo of last night's corridor. No clear lamps now, no water underfoot, but the sense of between remained, a thin shore he could stand on, tilt his ear, and hear the small things he used to miss. The ICU door slid and Dr. Patel came in, a nurse behind him pushing the med cart. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." He leaned in over the numbers, his voice carrying the warmth of fresh tea. "Much better last night. We'll ease the rate on a few meds and have you practice active breathing. It'll tire you, but it's good." He looked at Ethan, the professional gaze touching down one layer deeper. "If waves of worry show up, look at me, or pick the nearest detail, this button, this seam, and return to the 424 rhythm." "All right." Ethan nodded. A light tap on the shoulder, and the doctor stepped away like a guide who'd finished pointing the path. When the doctor left, Grace appeared. Not in a rush, not dramatic. She moved in small steps, careful not to turn the distance between them and the glass into theater. She stood where the rules allowed, eyes finding his. She didn't need to ask, "How are you?" The question lived in her whole face. Ethan wanted to say a lot, but his body reminded him, "Say little, say true." "I hear you," he rasped. "I'm here." Just 2 sentences, but it felt like he'd pried an old door open by one more hinge. Grace set a cloth tote on a chair, and from it drew a small notebook with a smooth, pale blue cover. "I wrote a few bits while waiting," she said, voice low, weighing each word. "Nothing big, just things I want to remember to tell you. If you're tired, I'll sit over there. When you're stronger, I'll read." Ethan looked at the notebook, ordinary to the point of plain, yet in this moment it was a stone with weight, keeping him from drifting. "Read," he said. "Just one piece." She opened to a page, her fingertip trembling slightly along the paper's edge. "Day 3, she read. "Rain since noon. I sit in the waiting chairs, the window fogs, my ink smears in one spot. An older man with silver hair is wheeled past. His wife walks behind, her hand never leaving the rail. I think about the beeping, how it might be the simplest music humans ever made. 2 notes, yet enough to keep the person you love here." She paused, looking up. "Do you hear it differently now?" Ethan drew in a long breath. "Yes," he said. It's like the clock hand on that wall clock at Grandma's, remember? We stayed there a few days. Every night we heard it. You said it made you feel safe. A soft smile flickered, thin as a pencil line. I remember. She closed the notebook and set it on the bag. Rest. I'll sit here. She slid back to the chair, eyes still on him. The distance held, but the thread between them showed itself. No wire, just a strand of invisible yarn from one chest to the other, taut enough to know they were there, slack enough to let them breathe. The days that followed, the ICU shed its skin in small rhythms of recovery. Ethan practiced sitting up, then placing his feet on the floor, a coolness running from soles to spine like a memory darting by. He trained his breathing, counting 4-4 until the monitors found the beat on their own. He learned to meet each coughing fit like a wave. Don't brace against it, tilt and let it pass. Whenever he tired too deeply, the night corridor shimmered at the edge of his sight. Not its lamps, not its water, just the feel of a quiet shore to stand on, a hand over his heart, and the knowledge there was still a path back. Dr. Patel stopped by daily, with the clipped confidence of someone both meticulous and trusting in the body's sturdiness. Good. Better. Don't rush, but don't fear the work. One noon he sat longer at the bedside, listening while Ethan haltingly described a middle place and the silver-haired keeper of lights. The doctor didn't press, didn't nod just to be kind. He said one sentence. When people nearly lose something, the brain opens a few old doors. Let them stay open a while. Then you'll know which to close and which to keep. Simple words, but they planted a new survey stake on the map of getting well. Between exercises and ragged naps, Ethan and Grace relearned how to talk, not in big speeches, but in thin slices. She told him the gas stove had started lighting slow. He listened and pictured the blue flame trembling in the dark. She told him the pothos on the sill was pushing new leaves. He inhaled and felt damp earth move through his lungs. He told her about the nurse whose voice sounded like water, about Dr. Patel counting breaths like a conductor, and about the silver-haired man, real or not. Grace didn't ask, was he real? She asked, what did he say? Ethan answered, that we drop things and sometimes have to go back and pick them up. She nodded. So what have you picked up? He was quiet a long time. A breakfast I never poured, he said, and an answer I never gave. That afternoon, when the sun slid off the window and the ICU returned to its neutral white lamps, Grace opened the notebook again. Day 5, she read. I made tea at the apartment and poured 2 cups, set one on your side, like a small ritual. I watched the steam rise and wondered if it could turn into a bridge, slip out the door, through the corridors, past the glass, to where you are. I don't know if it helps you. It helps me. Ethan closed his eyes and pictured that steam weaving through vents, circling the machines, touching his forehead like a light kiss. It helps me, he said. Truly. At night, the ICU had sounds of its own. A metal cart rolling by, someone's dry cough, a monitor pinging one notch, then quiet again. Ethan lay listening as if to a music he'd never thought to attend. At one point, he heard the slow slap of slippers in the hall. He opened his eyes and saw the silver-haired man. The man didn't look his way, but as he passed, his eyes slid over, 2 panes of glass catching a reflection. Done learning to breathe? He asked without stopping. Almost, Ethan answered in his head. The man nodded and disappeared past the next bed's curtain. No one else seemed to notice him. Ethan wasn't sure he needed them to. Part of him knew this was the mind sorting its light. A quieter part, set deeper, knew there are keepers of lamps who walk hallways the common eye doesn't record. The day they moved him from ICU to the step-down unit, a light rain fell. It stitched a thin veil across the window, making the outside pull closer, like a watercolor. A nurse pushed his bed along the long corridor where the ceiling lights marked a dotted line of tiny exclamation points. Under his blanket, Ethan watched Grace's shoes pace beside him. She didn't touch the rail. Rules were rules. But whenever the bed jostled through a turn, she leaned, eyes bracing the frame as if to steady him. The recovery unit was quieter, fewer machines, more people. A soft laugh down the room, the clink of a spoon in a bowl, a doctor dropping by with brief questions, the low buzz of a TV kept small. Ethan's bed sat near a window. From there he could see a slice of sky and a few branches quiver now and then. The antiseptic eased back, making room for clean linen and damp weather. At noon, Grace brought a small thermos. "Tea," she said, setting it on the tray and pouring into a paper cup. "Doctor says you can have a few sips." Ethan took it. The heat brushed his face, carrying a familiar note, the mild blend she favored late at night. He drank. The warm stream moved down his throat like a smooth line of memory, laying a gentle loop across his chest. "The breakfast I never poured," he murmured. "Maybe it starts with this cup." Grace leaned back, eyes a little wet. "We can pour from any hour," she said. "It doesn't have to be morning." The exercises turned concrete. Open-close the hand, draw up the knee, lift the heel, stand. Each motion like a letter he was learning again, slowly spelling a sentence. Sometimes fatigue flared, and he snapped at himself for a loose step or a stolen breath. Grace pressed her palm into the air, as if resting an invisible hand on his shoulder. No need to run. Just walk. One afternoon, pacing the hall behind a walker, Ethan stopped at a window. Outside, the clouds split to show a pale strip of blue. At his ear, he heard the soft rustle of fabric. Not anyone in the room, the ash-gray scarf again. 10 minutes. He remembered the words spilling from the teapot the night before and smiled. 10 minutes, he said aloud. From behind him, Grace heard and smiled back. 10 minutes. They started a small ritual. Each afternoon, when it was quiet, Grace read a passage from the notebook. Each night, before sleep, Ethan said one true sentence. Sometimes they were almost comically short. "I'm afraid of the follow-up visit. I miss the stove's click. I feel tiny without work." Sometimes it was only a sensation. "I smell wet earth in my chest." Grace didn't interpret, didn't soothe with big phrases. She tucked each true sentence into the notebook, a careful gatherer storing seeds. At night, the silver-haired man drifted by a few times. Sometimes he only tipped his head. Sometimes he dropped a stub of a sentence. "Put your foot down. Don't hold it in." "Enough." At first, Ethan answered in silence. Once he asked, "Who are you to me?" The man paused half a step and looked toward the window. "I'm the one who walks a little ahead," he said, "to point out the deep water." "Will I see you again after I leave the hospital?" He shrugged. "You won't need to, if you learn how to look. Lamps are everywhere. The question is whether you'll stand still long enough for your eyes to adjust." And then he moved on, his tread blending with the weary shuffle of others. People who might be real, might be imagined, but all walking the same bright, polished floor. On the 10th day, Ethan could circle the hallway with the walker. Back in bed, sweat beaded at his neck, the salt and cloth stirring a memory of early evening jogs from the first months of marriage. Two people trotting slowly, counting power poles, laughing when they ran out of breath. He told it. Grace listened. Their eyes touched for a second, then looked away, granting each other a bit of private space. "When you're home," she said, "we'll run again. We don't have to be fast." "We don't have to be fast," he repeated, feeling the words lodge in his bones like a small, sturdy nail. That night, Ethan lay on his side, watching a rectangle of streetlight soften on the wall. The water corridor didn't come back. He didn't need it to find his breath anymore. But deep down somewhere, he was grateful it had opened when it did. He thought of the ring returning to its warm place, of the teapot pouring words, of the buttons, "Stay and go home," that had turned into the small motions of ordinary days. In the morning, he suspected, Dr. Patel would talk discharge plans. The thought didn't lift him like a man escaping a cramped room. Instead, it settled like a light but serious weight. How not to drop what he'd just picked up. He closed his eyes and kept the 424, the beeps laying down the floorboards. On the fourth exhale, he heard the tiniest sound at the door, the turn of a notebook page. Grace was writing. He pictured her letters, round, with places blurred by the touch of her hand. He wanted to ask what she wanted to eat tomorrow, where she wanted to go, what to do with a rare sunny afternoon. He would ask. But for now, he let the questions lie where they belonged, like seeds under soil, waiting for thin morning. In the next bed, a patient coughed twice. A nurse walked quickly over. The reading lamp snapped on, then off. Night rain returned unexpectedly, dotting the window edge with fine silver beads. Ethan opened his eyes and saw his shadow merged with many others. All of them fragile. All of them precious, each in a different way. He set his hand over his chest, where the warm circle of the invisible ring still rested. a quiet loop tying 10 minutes to no need to be fast. He whispered, "Thanks." Not to anyone in particular. Thanks for numbers that know how to dance, for tubes that know the path, for hands that know how to touch, for the keepers of lamps who walk the night. Then he slept, a sleep no longer standing between, but with one foot already on the shore. In the morning, he would lift the other, and when the real door opened, without fireflies, he would know the way home. On the morning of discharge, the city opened its eyes under a sky as soft as a well-washed cotton towel. The step-down room's windows stayed shut, but the light was enough, laying a thin sheet over the bed. Ethan woke before the med alarm, no longer lost in fog. His body was still sore, yet its borders felt clear, like a shore revealed after the tide. He sat up slowly, feet to the cool floor, fingers gripping the rail, listening to small back muscles creak like old wooden steps. His breathing was steady. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. The count had settled inside him like a new habit that felt oddly long familiar. Grace arrived early, a light coat close to her frame, hair tied back, the familiar canvas tote on her shoulder. She smiled at the sight of him upright, not bright, but warm, like the kitchen light at dusk. "Ready?" she asked. Ethan nodded and heard his own voice, less hoarse now. Ready, but slow. The words put a little laugh in her eyes, like a thin sunbeam sliding along a tabletop. Dr. Patel came in with a file. He checked the readings, laid a cold stethoscope to chest and back. "Good to go," he said, writing tidy lines. "Meds, follow-ups, physical therapy. At home, keep practicing your breathing, take short walks, and don't try to do everything at once." He looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. Rest isn't doing nothing. Rest is work of another kind. The work that gives your body soil to sprout in. Ethan nodded, a nod full of thanks. "Thank you, Doctor." Patel smiled, as if he'd just seen a seed begin to break the surface. "See you at the follow-up," he said, and slipped out, leaving the faint, familiar soap scent and the whisper of paper. The discharge steps took more than an hour, but impatience never stirred. Ethan sat and watched small things. The young nurse with a fish-shaped pen clip, her hands clever as she folded pages. The old security guard holding a door for a man pushing a wheelchair. Respect so natural it looked like breathing. The orderly passing with a water carafe, light scattering in tiny bands across the glass. Each detail felt like a grain of sand in an hourglass, falling exactly where it should, murmuring, "Still here, still here." As the wheelchair rolled down the long corridor, Ethan felt like a man moving through slow-motion film. Landscapes hung on the walls, colors faded a shade, skies so blue they looked imagined, wheat fields gold as rugs. He'd walked past them a dozen times without recalling a single frame. Today he lingered and read the small caption under one photo, "Morning light at altitude." He thought of his own morning light at ground level, on the kitchen table, on Grace's shoulder, along the rim of a teacup. The automatic doors opened, the hospital smell thinned. Outside air touched him like a cool hand. On the steps, a breeze carried dry leaves and a thread of coffee from the shop across the street. The soundscape shifted, traffic, voices, a bird clucking on a roofline somewhere, a distant dog folded into it all. Ethan drew a deep breath. Warmth filled his chest, not the drug-soft kind, but the real warmth of open sky. Grace stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Let's go," she said, and together, one pushing, one guarding, they steered toward the lot. Their car was decently old, clean, the fabric seats scented with wax. Grace opened the door, folded the chair, and helped him into the passenger seat. The belt clicked with a small, decisive snap. As they pulled away, Ethan watched the hospital recede. Grids of windows, tiny balconies with cactus pots, white coats flickering in and out. He didn't feel a wild release. More like a man casting off from a harbor after riding out bad weather, carrying the sound of waves and salt in his clothes as a reminder not to gamble with storms. The drive home wasn't long, but it held 100 things he'd once ignored. A woman walking a child across the street, their hands swinging to the traffic light's rhythm. A newspaper seller adjusting a twine knot in the shade. A shop half open, where he caught a glimpse of loaves toasted to a deep gold. At a red light, a child peered in, saw Ethan, and waved as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan waved back. The light turned green and the car moved on, but the wave stayed with him, a small fish flipping in his palm, so alive it was almost funny. The apartment greeted them with quiet familiarity. The door opened on old wood, laundry soap, and a trace of tea still hanging in the air. Grace went ahead, clearing the path, pulling out a chair so he could sit before the next step. "Slow," she said, not as an order, but like a hello. Ethan sat at the table, studying the coarse cloth runner with a faint stain that might have been a long-ago spill. The white porcelain teapot waited there, its spout curved like a smile. He touched it, warm for real now, not only in memory. Grace set down the freshly boiled water, placed the pot on its saucer, and poured. Steam rose, soft as a thank you that didn't need words. Ethan lifted his cup and let the warmth brush his face. "The breakfast we never poured," he whispered. "We pour it now." Grace sat across from him, hands around her cup, eyes meeting his and staying. "We can pour as much as we like," she said. "It doesn't have to be on time." They ate a simple lunch, plain congee with scallions, a small bowl of tender carrots, a little steamed fish. Ethan ate slowly, like rereading a familiar paragraph, spoon by spoon, word by word. Each time he set the spoon down, he looked up and found Grace's eyes. No probing, no hurrying. Afterward, he rested on the chair. The window was cracked, birdsong drifted in. The thread of notes tugged his mind away from its old tautness. He closed his eyes and began to hear the timbre of each voice. One sharp, one long, one like a singer warming up. Ears trained to hunt only work signals were learning a new language, the language of quiet. In the afternoon, Ethan stood and practiced walking a few loops around the apartment. The first steps trembled, but each footfall on the wood gave him a sure, small sound, like a pencil tapping paper. Grace stayed near, not holding him, but close enough to catch him if balance slipped. They passed the living room shelves, the spines still and bright. He paused, eyes skimming titles long untouched, poems, novels, a cookbook flagged with a sticky note. "Read to me tonight?" he asked. "Yes," Grace said, sliding out a thin volume and flipping a few pages. "This one has a lot of white space. When we finish, there'll still be room to breathe." Evenings sank in slowly, like milk poured into a room. The kitchen light clicked on. Garlic sizzled a quick circuit, then gave way to broth. Ethan sat and watched Grace's hands, cutting, tasting, wiping a plate's edge. Once, he wouldn't have looked twice. Now the motions braided into a home song, turning the kitchen into a small stage. He rose carefully, stepped close, rested his hand on her back for 1 second, and let it go. Small as a comma, but enough to join 2 sentences. After dinner, they carried tea onto the balcony. It wasn't wide, just room for 2 chairs and a pothos pushing new leaves. The city murmured below like a far river. The breeze brought a mix of dust and green, leaving the lightest taste on his lips. "Where do you want to go tomorrow?" Ethan asked. "Nowhere far," Grace said. "The park nearby. Sit a while and watch people run." Ethan nodded. 10 minutes, he said. "Or 20. Or we don't count," she smiled. They sat mostly in silence, trading a few short lines. In the quiet, Ethan heard his heartbeat, not like a fist on a door anymore, but like an old wall clock keeping good time, round and even. That first night home, sleep took some coaxing, as it often does after hospital nights. He turned, breathed deep, kept the 424. Beside him, Grace slept steadily, the breath of someone healthy, tired in a different way. He didn't chase sleep. He sat up, leaned on the headboard, clicked on the small warm lamp, and picked up Grace's notebook. She'd left a pen. Ethan wrote. His hand wasn't steady. The script wasn't pretty. It didn't matter. Day 1 at home. Birdsong. The smell of stewed carrots. Tea steam on my skin. Your smile not bright, but warm. The feel of my feet on the floor, like dropping a small anchor. He paused, regarded the lines, stones set along a path. He closed the book, turned off the light, lay back, and listened as the city thinned until the clock hand in his chest slid him into light sleep. The next morning, they went to the park. Sunlight wasn't harsh. It dappled through leaves like fallen coins along the path. Ethan walked slowly, left hand resting lightly on Grace's arm. On a bench, an old man fed pigeons. On the track, a few young runners passed, earbuds in, sweat catching light. Ethan sat and let out a long breath, catching the scent of dry grass in the wind. "What do you see?" Grace asked softly,